The wind moaned like an old ghost through the narrow canyons, carrying with it the red dust of the Arizona frontier and the sharp scent of blood and smoke. The cracked-tooth saloon stood crooked against the dying light, its roof half-caved, its sign dangling on a single rusted nail. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and whiskey sweat, a feverish stench of lawless men who'd long since forgotten the sound of conscience. A lantern hissed above the bar, its flame flickering over the warped floorboards, stained by spilled drink and older, darker things. The laughter came in slashes, jagged and cruel, rising from a back table where 5 men sat hunched over cards, revolvers, and a single burlap sack that barely hid the woman beneath it. Clara Dade didn't scream anymore. Her mouth was stuffed with a kerchief soaked in something that tasted like vinegar and smoke. Her arms were bound behind her, wrists raw. Blood throbbed inside her ears, the laughter bouncing through her skull like a hammer. She had no idea how long she'd been in that chair. Her feet were numb. Her heart, too, had gone quiet now. It had started with a simple delivery. She had ridden out at dawn with a mule cart stacked with dried beans and flour for the Tolson homestead. A favor, nothing more. She'd even packed lemon drops for their youngest, a girl with one eye and too many questions. But on her way back, she heard the gunshots. Then came the hooves. The Rattlehead gang rode like they always did, drunk, whooping, firing at birds and signs, whatever moved. She turned the mule hard, tried to race for a dry gulch she knew. But they caught her, laughing, dragging her off the seat, kicking the flour bags aside like bones. Now she sat in the belly of hell, gagged and blind, listening to them play for her like she was nothing but a skin of whiskey or a busted saddle. Elias Tripp leaned back in his chair, boots crossed on the edge of the card table. He was the kind of man who wore silk in the desert, a gambler's grin painted permanent across his face. His eyes were the color of grave dirt, and his voice could charm the venom from a snake. He licked his thumb and flicked another card onto the table. "She's the final hand, boys," he drawled, the words curling like smoke. "Win her, keep her. Lose, well, she ain't going nowhere anyhow." The others hooted. One slapped the table. Another reached across to steal a swig of someone else's bottle. These weren't men anymore. Just teeth and hunger and rot. They had names once, probably. Families, maybe. Now they were just ghosts wearing skin. Outside, the wind screamed against the slats of the building. It sounded almost like a voice. Inside, the game ground on. Elias leaned forward, eyes fixed on his cards, then glanced at Clara's slumped figure. "Pretty little thing," he said softly. "Wasn't much for talking when we found her, but I reckon she'll learn." A murmur rose. One of the outlaws reached forward and tapped her head through the sack with the back of his knuckle. "She's still breathing?" he asked. "She will be," Elias said, "long as one of us gets lucky tonight." The cards fell like guillotine blades. The laughter dulled into low grunts, mumbled curses. Clara's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. She imagined the faces around her, red-eyed and yellow-toothed, waiting for her fate to be scribbled in ink and gambling luck. Then the saloon doors groaned. Not the wind, not the usual slam or drunken stumble, but a slow, deliberate creak, like the wood itself was warning them. Every head turned. Boots hit the floor with a quiet thud. Dust spiraled in around the legs of a man who hadn't been there a moment ago. He stood just beyond the reach of the lantern light, his shadow long and lean, stitched to the boards like it might crawl away if he stepped forward. No one spoke. He wore no gun at his hip, just a length of coiled rope tucked into his belt and a wide-brimmed hat that hid his face. His coat was patched and sun-faded, stained at the cuffs, but there was something about the stillness of him that made the room colder. Elias squinted. "Well now, either the devil finally walked through that door," he said, grinning, "or someone's real lost." The stranger didn't move. One of the gang, Simmy, maybe, or Ned, reached for his rifle where it leaned against the bar. The stranger raised a hand. Not fast, not threatening, just enough to stop time. "I'm not here for drinks," the man said, voice low, dry like mesquite bark. Elias pushed back his chair slowly. "You come in here without a weapon, without a name, without a prayer, and you think that matters?" I came for the girl. Clara flinched. Her body jerked upright. She knew that voice. Somewhere under the layers of dust and time, her heart clawed against her ribs. Elias chuckled, eyes flicking toward the sack. Well, hell, he said. Ain't that sweet? Another white knight. You know how many men tried that already, friend. She ain't yours to gamble, the stranger said. Not tonight. A moment passed. The gang looked at Elias. Elias looked at the rope. You planning to lasso me down like a calf? He said, smiling without humor. I don't plan, the man replied. I finish. A whisper began among the outlaws, the way men whisper before lightning strikes. They couldn't place him, couldn't place the stillness, but it scratched at something old in their bones, something they thought they buried in the war, or in blood. Clara felt a shift. Her fingers twitched. Her lip bled where she bit it. She couldn't see, but her soul opened its eyes. Elias stepped forward now, dragging a knife from his belt. Not in threat, just letting it shine. How about this? You want her. You play for her. Sit your skinny ass at the table. I'll deal you in. Same stakes. The stranger didn't blink. I don't play games. Another gust slammed against the saloon. The lamp above the bar sputtered. The whiskey bottles rattled. The stranger stepped forward, slow and steady. The dust clung to his coat, his boots silent on the bloody wood. And as he reached the table, he spoke just loud enough to freeze the men around him. You used to go by Elijah Trapper. Back when you were worth something. Elias froze. I knew you when you still had a mother, the stranger continued. When you ran from fights, not toward him. Elias turned pale beneath his grin. Who the hell are you? One of the outlaws asked. The stranger reached into his coat pocket, pulled something small and silver, tossed it on the table. A wedding ring. Clara let out a sound, a gasp muffled by the cloth. Her heart broke open. Elias stepped back. The man finally removed his hat. Thomas Rook, the one they left for dead 10 years ago. The one who never stopped walking back through dust and blood and smoke. The one who came home when it mattered. Rook looked down at Elias, eyes dark with the kind of fury no fire could burn out. You made your last bet, Elijah, he said, rolling up his sleeves. And I've come to collect. For a moment, silence hung heavy as desert heat, the kind that came before a thunderclap or a killing. The stranger's face, Thomas Rook's face, caught the glow of the lantern now, and no one was laughing anymore. Not even Elias. The saloon had seen murder, had seen wild-eyed drifters, snake oil prophets, bounty men full of buckshot, but this was different. Thomas Rook wasn't here to perform. He didn't wear violence like some men wore pride. He wore it like a scar that never quite closed. Dust clung to the lines in his face, and the rope looped at his hip swung faintly as he stepped forward. No gun, no badge, just that slow, certain stride of a man who had crawled out of something worse than hell. His eyes, dark, scorched things, swept the room, but they didn't linger on the trembling outlaws or the trembling whiskey bottles. They stopped only at the chair in the corner, the one with the sack. He stared at her. She didn't move. He couldn't be sure if she was conscious, but she was breathing, just barely. You lost, preacher, one of the men sneered, trying to sound braver than he felt. You wander in from the rocks looking to save a soul or two. Another chuckled nervously, but the sound died quick. Rook's eyes never left Elias. His voice came low and quiet, like water dripping in a cave. Elijah Trapper, he said, you still good at losing? Or you need someone to remind you how? The color drained from Elias' face, like smoke rising from a dying campfire. He leaned back, mask cracking for a heartbeat. It had been more than a decade, but the name carried weight like a coffin. He hadn't heard it in years. Not since he buried that name and the man who knew it in a ravine south of Santerio. Don't know what you think you're walking into, friend, Elias said slowly, regaining his sneer. But we don't take kindly to dead men rising. I didn't rise, Rook said, his boots halting inches from the table. I walked, every step back from that ravine, every blister, every bone, and I walked with one name in my mouth. Elias' knuckles whitened on the table edge. Clara, her name landed like thunder. Rook finally tore his eyes from her, just long enough to look around. For men. One woman with a sack over her head. His hands didn't tremble. His breath didn't quicken. He'd faced worse odds in darker places. But even now, even here, he couldn't stop seeing her as she was, before the war, before Elias. He saw her under the sycamore tree behind the Dade Ranch, her dress the color of the sky after rain, her hair pinned back with stubborn grace. He remembered how she'd touch his wrist while he carved fence rails, how she said his silence made her feel safer than any sheriff ever could. She'd waited for him when he left. She'd kissed him at dawn before he rode out to track border raiders. They called it a skirmish. But skirmishes didn't leave a man buried alive beneath a pile of his own men. He hadn't died, though. The buzzards thought he would. Elias thought he had. The bastard even stripped his rifle and left him breathing sand. Rook clawed his way out with 2 shattered ribs and a bullet lodged in his thigh. Took him 6 months to walk again. Took him 6 years to find Elias' name on a wanted poster with a dozen dead towns behind him. Took 10 to get here. And Clara, she grieved him, buried a memory, moved on, until the rattleheads came for her. Word traveled in strange ways. A trader whispered it near the Colorado line. Widow Dade, they got her. Tripp's gang. He's making bets with her like she's chattel. Rook didn't stop riding after that. He looked back at her now. The sack hadn't moved. The bruises on her arms bloomed like dark lilies beneath the lamplight. Let her go, Rook said. Elias scoffed, but his voice held less steel than before. Ain't how this works. She's the pot. The game was fair. We were almost done. You know I don't care about fair. You still think you're some righteous revenant. Elias spat. You ain't holy, Rook. You're a ghost too dumb to stay buried. Maybe, Rook said, but even ghosts got debts. He stepped around the table, slow, watching every eye twitch, every hand inch toward a weapon. But none of them drew. They didn't know why. They just didn't. I'm not here to make speeches, Rook said. I'm here to wager. 1 bet. You and me. No cards. No bullets. Elias narrowed his eyes. What then? Just hands and bone, Rook said. You win, I walk. You get both eyes and the girl. And if you win? Elias asked. Rook's voice dropped lower than a grave. I take her home. And you leave this world. Laughter rose from the men around the table, but it was short-lived. Elias looked around at them, uncertain. They didn't recognize the name, but they saw it in Rook's face now. That absence, that fury, that look of a man who hadn't been alive for a long time, but never stopped moving. Elias grinned. Fine. No bullets. Just you and me. Flesh against flesh. He stood, cracking his neck. His frame was thicker now, heavier than it had been years ago, but slower too. He pulled off his coat, dropped his pistol belt. But you lose, he added, voice curling at the edges. I take your eyes. You still owe me 1, don't forget. Rook gave no answer. He was already unbuttoning his coat, folding it slowly and placing it on the chair beside Clara. He glanced at her, but didn't touch. Not yet. She stirred. Just a breath. But it was enough. He leaned down, whispering near the sack. You're not alone. The words barely passed his lips before Elias lunged. A sucker punch aimed to drop him cold. But Thomas Rook wasn't a soldier anymore. He was something else, something leaner, sharper. He twisted, stepped inside the punch, and drove an elbow into Elias' ribs. The air left the outlaw in a grunt. He stumbled back. The saloon erupted in shouts, boots scraping, chairs sliding. But no one moved to interfere. This wasn't about them anymore. Rook circled, eyes never blinking. He wasn't faster. He wasn't stronger. But he remembered. Every lie. Every bruise Clara never spoke of. Every step in the sand. He remembered what it meant to lose everything. And he didn't plan to lose her again. The first punch landed like thunder. Elias struck with the force of a man who had fought too many barroom brawls and lost none. His fist connected with Rook's cheek, snapping his head sideways. Blood painted the air. The saloon roared, chairs scraped back, and boots stamped like war drums. Rook staggered but didn't fall. He turned his head slowly, eyes blazing, jaw already swelling. And then he stepped forward, one measured stride, and drove his knuckles into Elias' gut. The outlaw gasped, folding for a breath, but came up swinging again. The blows were wild now, wide arcs of fury and power. Rook ducked one, took another to the ribs, and answered with a hook that cracked Elias' lip open. The floor became their battleground. Lanterns swung on their chains, shadows dancing like devils across the walls. Men hollered and pounded fists on tables. The air filled with the sound of flesh against flesh, of bones cracking, of groans ripped from deep within the chest. Blood dripped between floorboards where spilled whiskey once dried. Rook moved with something more than muscle. His steps were slow, sure, deliberate. He didn't fight like he was trying to win. He fought like he was remembering. He remembered Clara in the blue gingham dress the day they'd wed, standing barefoot in a dry riverbed, laughing as he fumbled to slip the silver band on her finger. He remembered her burying that same ring in his saddlebag before he left for the border skirmish, whispering, *, bring it back with you, or don't come back at all. *, and he remembered Elias, smiling, calm, lying through his teeth, while swearing he'd guard Rook's back. Then the smoke, the gunfire, and Elias riding off with the gold, and leaving him crushed beneath a dead horse. Every strike Rook threw now carried that memory, a decade of rot condensed into fists. He wasn't fast anymore. His left shoulder ached with every swing, and blood poured from a split just above his brow. But his rage was older than pain, older than mercy. In the corner, Clara heard it all. The world was still darkness behind the sack, but her other senses sharpened. She could smell blood, whiskey, sweat. She could hear the breathless grunts, the sickening thuds of fists on flesh. She knew what a man sounded like when he fought to save someone, and what he sounded like when he fought to kill. Somewhere in the thick of the chaos, she heard a voice, low, familiar, a whisper near her ear. Then fingers brushed the sack. Light. The world flared, harsh and golden, and she flinched as it flooded her bruised eyes. She blinked fast, vision swimming. And there he was, Thomas Rook, alive, bleeding, standing between her and the past she thought had killed him. Her mouth trembled behind the gag. She tried to speak his name, but all that came out was a sob that caught in her throat like a blade. Elias saw her. He grinned, blood in his teeth, and threw Rook against the edge of a table with a crash that silenced the room for half a breath. Which shattered. Rook collapsed to the floor, groaning, a smear of crimson on the boards beneath him. Clara gasped. Elias loomed above, chest heaving, lips curled. You always were slow, Rook, he spat, dragging your dead weight after a woman who already buried you. Rook rolled to his side, coughing blood into his palm. One eye was nearly swollen shut. The other burned like a coal that wouldn't die. He pushed himself up on shaking arms. The rope at his belt slid loose. No one noticed at first, not until it uncoiled with a whisper, like a snake waking up. Elias stepped forward, cocky now, his boot lifted to crush Rook's skull. But the rope lashed out. In one sudden, fluid motion, Rook caught Elias' ankle and yanked. The outlaw dropped hard, head cracking against the table leg. Before he could shout, Rook was on him, knees planted, rope snaring his arms, twisting with a skill born not of cowboy work, but something darker. A scout's knot, the kind used to bind prisoners in the desert, the kind that didn't come loose. The men froze. No more cheers, no more hollering, just the wind howling outside, and the sound of Elias Trapper choking on dust and rage as Rook pulled the last loop tight around his throat and yanked him upright like a captured beast. Clara's eyes brimmed. The outlaw king of the Rattleheads writhed in his own saloon, bound like a hog, gasping. Rook turned slowly, blood dripping down his temple. He looked at every man in the room. This ain't a rescue, he said, voice low, gravel-worn. This is a reckoning. No one moved. The silence was thick, sacred. Elias struggled, eyes bulging, veins pulsing. Rook stepped forward and dragged him by the rope across the blood-streaked floor, past Clara, past the gawking outlaws too stunned to reach for their guns. He didn't stop until they reached the saloon's broken door, wind clawing through it like judgment itself. Outside, the dawn was just beginning to rise, pale gold against the jagged red cliffs. Rook paused in the doorway. "This man stole 10 years," he said, loud enough for every coward inside to hear. "He left a good man to die and gambled with the life of a woman better than any of you ever deserved to know." He pulled the rope tighter, and Elias wheezed. "There's a debt due here, and I intend to collect it." Then he dragged Elias into the morning, toward the place where justice still remembered the names carved in bone. The sky was turning the color of cooled embers as Thomas Rook dragged Elias Trapper out of the saloon by the rope cinched tight around his wrists. The outlaw's boots scraped uselessly across the wood, spurs clinking like wind chimes in a graveyard. The saloon doors creaked closed behind them, muting the stunned silence inside. Morning cracked open along the canyon rim, its light spilling down in golden shafts that touched the dirt like forgiveness. Dust kicked up around Rook's feet, swirling in the wind, catching in his lashes, sticking to the blood dried at the corner of his mouth. His ribs screamed with each step, but he didn't slow. The cracked tooth stood tall and crooked, its second-story balcony looming like a gallows scaffold the town never needed, until now. Doors opened, slowly, quietly. Windows creaked. Shutters edged open. Faces appeared, lined with fear, worn thin by years of silence. Men with cracked hands, women in kerchiefs holding toddlers who didn't yet understand the shape of evil. They stared, not at the outlaw with his lip split and jaw swollen, but at the man dragging him, the man they thought long gone, long dead, Thomas Rook. Some gasped, a few wept, and some, those old enough to remember when the town had a heart, nodded once and stepped into the street. Clara followed, barefoot. Her feet touched the cold morning earth with the same certainty they once had when she'd walked beside Thomas across the ridge line, hand in hand, years before the war. Her dress was torn, her arms bruised, but her spine was unbroken. Her breath was steady. She looked like a woman carved from the canyon itself, weathered, yes, but unshakable. Rook reached the balcony stairs and hauled Elias up one plank at a time. The outlaw fought with what strength he had left, cursing between spit and pain. Rook didn't respond. He didn't look down. He just climbed, the way he always had, one hand, then the other. At the top, he flung Elias against the rail. The world below stilled. Even the wind quieted. The sun crested the ridge at last, flooding the street with gold. It bathed Clara's hair in light. It lit the noose Rook, now tied with grim, mechanical precision. Elias coughed blood onto the planks, teeth red and broken. "You got a choice," Rook said, voice rough but even. "Confess, and I'll give you the quick end." He held the loop before him like a priest offering communion. "Stay quiet." He leaned close, so close Elias could smell the desert and the blood and the 10 years of buried rage. "And you'll swing slow." Elias spat in his face. Rook didn't flinch. He slipped the rope around Elias' neck and pulled it tight. A whisper moved through the gathered crowd. It wasn't bloodlust in their eyes. It was release. Rook slung the rope over a beam blackened from years of smoke and sin. He knotted it once firmly and stepped back. Elias stumbled, choked, tried to beg, but no one was listening anymore. The drop was short. The snap was loud. His boots kicked once, twice, then nothing. Rook stood at the edge, breathing like a man who'd climbed a mountain only to find another waiting on the other side. Below, the townspeople didn't cheer. They simply watched. It wasn't triumph they witnessed. It was memory being set down like a stone in the river. Clara stepped forward through the crowd, each step slow and sure. Her bare feet kissed the dust. Her breath came in quiet pulls. She walked until she stood beneath Elias' swaying corpse, the rope creaking gently in the breeze. She looked up into the face of the man who'd stolen her body, her years, her faith in the world, and she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, wherever men like him went, "You should have folded." Her voice cracked like glass, and in it was every sleepless night, every bruise, every prayer unanswered. Then she turned to Thomas, and everything fell silent except for the wind. Their eyes met across the yard, the space between them no longer a canyon, but a thread pulling them home. She moved first. He stepped down, and when they reached each other, they didn't embrace. They simply stood there, shoulder to shoulder, side by side, staring into the rising sun like two souls pulled from the fire. Behind them, the saloon groaned, the town breathed, and the rope remembered. That night, fire took the cracked tooth. The saloon lit up like kindling soaked in whiskey, flames licking through the roof beams, windows pulsing with orange fury. The townsfolk didn't ask who struck the match. Maybe no one did. Maybe the building just knew its time was up. Some said they saw Rook walking away just before the blaze caught. Others swore Clara stood at the edge of the porch, watching the fire crackle with something in her eyes that wasn't quite sorrow. No one tried to save it. They stood on porches and in doorways, watching the flames consume the old rot and blood that had soaked into the wood for years. The smoke curled up into the stars, thick and bitter, like a bad memory finally being told to leave. By morning, the place was ash, and by morning, Rook was gone. No tracks led from town, just wind-scuffed dirt and a silence too clean to touch. Clara stood near the smoldering bones of the saloon for a long time, holding the saddlebag she'd once buried a ring inside. Her dress fluttered in the breeze, her hair tangled with soot and sunrise. When someone asked if she was all right, she simply nodded and said, "It's done." She returned to her land that same day, riding the same old mule the gang had let wander loose. The fences were still broken. The porch sagged like a tired sigh. But the house stood. And so did she. The townsfolk, once too afraid to look her in the eye, started tipping their hats again. They brought her fence posts, tin for the roof, pies that were too sweet and meant well. No one spoke of Elias Trapper anymore. They just said him, with a certain spit to the word. But they spoke of Rook in hush and heat. Some said he was a ghost, conjured by Clara's grief and rage, riding out of the canyons when she needed him most. Others claimed he was never truly alive after the war, just a man-shaped wound that walked and didn't stop walking. One boy insisted he saw Rook by the river 3 nights later, kneeling in prayer with the sun bleeding down the cliffs behind him. Clara never said much about it, but she did ride out to the canyons one morning, just as the wind picked up. She wore the same dress from the fire, mended now at the seams. She carried a small spade and something silver in her palm. The wind pushed at her shoulders as she climbed, whispering old names through the rocks. When she reached the ridge, where the sycamore tree used to grow, she stopped. There was nothing left but the view, the horizon spilling out into red dust and endless sky. She knelt and began to dig. The soil was dry, stubborn, but she worked slow and steady, the way he taught her to do everything. She dug a hole the size of a boot heel, maybe smaller. Then she dropped in the silver ring. Next to it, she pressed a length of frayed rope, coiled once, tied at both ends. She sat back on her heels, staring down at it. Her hands were dirty. Her eyes weren't wet. She whispered, "You were the storm," and covered it with earth. When she stood again, the wind caught her braid and pulled it behind her like a banner. The canyon below didn't echo. It held her silence like a secret. And then she rode home. Some say the grave's still there, if you know where to look. Just a bump in the dirt beneath a thin layer of stone. Some claim the rope rises from the ground on moonless nights, twitching like it remembers the weight it once bore. But Clara never went back. She built her fences, grew tomatoes, took in strays, animals, kids, whatever wandered close. She never remarried, but she never lived alone either. The people came to her porch with their troubles, and she listened. She didn't preach. She didn't judge. But if you asked about justice, her face would turn to stone, and she'd say, "It's got a long memory, and it walks." Years passed. One autumn, after the harvest, a trader passed through town and told of a man out west who walked with a limp and wore no gun. Said he'd seen him talking to a woman in a mining camp where the law had gone thin, helping bury a man no one else would touch. The trader said the stranger's name was Thomas, but his eyes didn't match the name. They were darker. No one questioned it. They just nodded and let the wind tell the rest. Because the truth was simple. She had loved him once, and he had come back for her when no one else would. Whatever else he was, ghost, outlaw, broken soldier, he was hers. And in the wind that passed through the canyon, the town, and the folds of her dress, you could sometimes hear it still. Her name. sung low, carried soft, like a man walking toward home.